Sekeres Price for Wednesday, February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day 2024. Coming to you.
At me or the listener?
Listeners, viewers.
Oh.
Thank you for joining on YouTube. Thank you for listening.
I decorated the place for those watching on YouTube.
I see that. Pink. Very nice touch. Coming to you from the Go-Goat Sports Studio, built by Arbor Lee here at the iconic Wall Center. Well, you're too late for Valentine's Day, but if you want to surprise your special someone with a staycation, call the Wall. 604-331-1000. Ask for the Sekeres Price rate. Some blackout dates apply. Matt Sekeres alongside Blake Price. He's already spoken. Grady Sass hitting switches, conducting things with Madison Buckingham, and a big show planned for you, all brought to you by Applewood Auto Group.
Yeah, when you come to the Wall Center, you'll probably be parking your brand new car from Applewood Kia in Surrey, I would guess.
Yeah.
Because when you look at what the deal is right now on the Kia Niro EV and EV6, I can imagine you in it, folks. The 2024s get you a complimentary EV charger or a complimentary set of winter tires. Go check it out, Applewood Kia in Surrey. It's all good at Applewood.
Poll question today. We are asking you, will the Canucks third line be too expensive to keep together next season? Yes or no? You can vote at Sekeres Price on Twitter and YouTube. We are doing this after the Vancouver Canucks beat the Chicago Blackhawks 4-2 at the United Center. And once again, it is that trio of Teddy Blueger, Dakota Joshua, and Conor Garland doing the damage. We talked about it last week. They have been doing so many things well. The production is bound to come, much like we said at the beginning of the season. They are doing so many things well. The production is bound to come. Well, sure enough, it does. Conor Garland with 2 goals, Dakota Joshua with a 3-point night. He also gets into a fight with Mackenzie Entwistle, becomes the first Canuck with a Gordie Howe hat trick since Tanner Pearson on New Year's Day 2022. 2 assists for Filip Hronek in this game. Elias Lindholm gets back on the board with an assist, and Nils Höglander up to 17 goals now, playing alongside countrymen Lindholm and Elias Pettersson in just 10 minutes of 41 seconds of ice last night for Höglander. And he gets his 17th goal. So the Canucks keep up the winning, a 3-1-1 road trip. They are home Thursday to the Detroit Red Wings. Matter of fact, they stayed the night in Chicago. This is, old sleep doctor learnings, right? The end of a long road trip, you're better off to stay than get up in the wee hours because you'll still be affected a couple of days later. And I will say this, 3 games now against the Chicago Blackhawks, and granted the last 2 without Connor Bedard. I have trouble watching the Chicago Blackhawks.
They are the antidote for fun.
They get 1 shot in the opening period. It comes in the last minute, and they get a Bronx cheer from the faithful there at the United Center. I checked in with our friends in Chicago yesterday. Connor Bedard did actually sell them tickets. Like, their season's ticket numbers are up. Their attendance is up. But that is not NHL hockey, what they are rolling out. There's just a pathos around that team without Bedard that reminds me of watching like a 2-14 CFL outfit. It's like below the entertainment standard that I set for myself over 2.5, 3 hours. Glad we're done with Chicago. Can't wait to see Bedard next year here in Vancouver. And never thought I'd say this because iconic franchise and a fantastic rivalry. And of course, Jim Cornelison in the show at the United Center is usually pretty good, but good riddance to this season series with the Blackhawks.
Yeah, there's not much there. They doubled them up in shots really throughout the course of the game. And even with that stat, even with the shots very much in the Canucks favor, it didn't necessarily it did feel like the possession was in the Canucks favor, but it didn't feel like it was an entertaining game where the Canucks were ready to pile up 8 or 9 goals either. Like, they did just enough to make sure that the Canucks were, needing to work for scoring chances, even though the Canucks owned the puck. It wasn't a super fun game. That being said, there was a couple of nice goals. They made the most of it, and they got the result. I wanted it to be an emphatic win, and it was that, despite it not showing up on the scoreboard. It wasn't a blowout. Kind of wanted it to be a more blowout-y kind of game. It was a blowout in terms of puck possession at the very least. It was sort of never in doubt. And that's good because the Canucks needed to prove that to themselves, I think. again, 3-1-1, you'd think people are crazy to wonder about the Canucks play of late, but in the end, they didn't win a lot of games on the judges' cards over the course of the road trip. So for them to do that and just look like the far superior team, that's where you want to see them at the end of this road trip. So
Conor Garland gets to 10 goals. Well, actually gets to 11. So the Canucks now with 10 double-digit scores. I don't know about you. I did not ever feel like this game was in peril.
No, as I said, it was never in doubt. It was the non-blowout is the best way to describe it.
Mm-hmm. So the Canucks get up to 10 double-digit scores. Quinn Hughes records point number 307 in his already illustrious NHL career. Does so in his 337th game. He ties Doug Lidster for 5th all-time in Canucks scoring by a defenseman. He is 18 points away from tying Mattias Ohlund for 2nd all-time. We've mentioned this stat before. I think it's fair to say that Quinn Hughes is going to be the 2nd most prolific defenseman in Vancouver Canucks history by the end of this season.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which says more about the Canucks' 50-year history with defensemen, I think, than it does about Quinn Hughes, but it also says something pretty great about the Canucks captain and the scoring pace he's on, because here's the other thing, Blake Price. With JT Miller and Elias Pettersson not getting on the score sheet in Chicago, Hughes is 66 points, is 3 back of Petey and Miller. I mean, he's got a shot to lead them in scoring at the end of the season,
which would be something. He didn't he put one off the bar, or no, off the shoulder. It was off the shoulder there. Nice attempt at scoring last night as well. So he very well could have added to that total. But yeah, I mean, he's the steadiest Eddie of the top point getters, right? Like he doesn't go on as big a drought, I don't think, as the other guys in that top 4, Besser, Miller, Pettersson included. So, can he maintain and avoid those droughts and beat those two? Yeah, I think it is possible.
Before we move on to Phil Kessel here, Detroit game on Thursday. We'll talk a little bit more about it on tomorrow's show.
Mm-hmm.
But needless to say, a desperate Detroit team, and people wondering, are there going to be fireworks stemming from the Jake Wallman Gritty celebration or the Nikita Zadorov hit on Lucas Raymond? Thoughts there?
I think there's a bigger chance for there to be Zadorov retribution than Wallman retribution. I honestly,
except who wants to take a run at big Nikita Zadorov? Like I hear what you're saying.
That's not the way it would be. It would go down.
Oh, you think they're going at somebody else on the Canucks?
You hit our best player?
Yeah. Okay. Well, head up then, Quinn Hughes. Head up, Elias Pettersson tomorrow.
Yeah.
With the Detroit Red Wings in at Rogers Arena. Okay, speaking of that balanced scoring, here's Coach Tocchet on, the third line again. Bluger, Joshua, Garland, getting it done.
It's great because if some guys are getting if they're in some slumps, other lines can pick it up. And I think the Garland line, if we have some guys that are not scoring goals, they can, chip in. So, it's just about, when you're in an 82 game, you're schedule, you're going to have certain guys have slumps, certain lines, and you pick it up. And right now they're picking up for us.
It's been just absolutely unbelievable. There's a lot of comparisons between the 2011 team and this team, just to try to sort of reflect on how good does this team have to be a Stanley Cup finalist, for instance. And I'll say this third line is a lot better than the third line from 2011.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a different era, so it's styled differently. But I actually think this third line would actually have worked back then too.
Help me out. It was Manny, it was Higgins, and
I mean,
Raymond.
It was Torres and LaPierre.
Torres.
I mean, it was a little bit fluid there,
right? And then, of course, when Samuelson went down, it got even more fluid, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But this line has enough grit with Joshua, has enough just tenacity because of Garland. Honestly, I think this would be a third line that would span the ages.
On the poll question, sorry, I meant to get to the poll question before we got on to Detroit and the Tocchet clip. I voted yes that it is going to be too expensive to keep this group together for next year. Bluger and Joshua are the UFAs. You're already paying Garland $5 million. You have to prioritize Elias Pettersson. You have to prioritize Filip Hronek. And frankly, you have to prioritize another defenseman, whether that's a re-signing of a Cole Zadorov Myers, because they're all UFA, or a replacement, because that's effectively a top 4 defenseman that you're looking at having to re-sign or replace for next season.
I said this.
Frankly, you may need 2 of those guys either re-signed or replaced.
I said this at the halfway mark of the season. I'll be consistent here. The scouting that went into selecting Joshua and Bluger just needs to go back to work again. That's if. Now, I think you can offer them a raise, a small raise, and hope upon hopes.
Cap's going up. So,
but still, you've already spent all that. You have to hope upon all hopes that they recognize that this could be a fun place to play for the next couple of years if they can keep people together. And if they're okay for a few $100K more than they made last year, then you're welcome to come back. But failing that, the pro scouting department goes back to work the same way they did in selecting these guys, and you find the new addition.
And frankly, for me, if it's a choice, it's Dakota Joshua. He is a better offensive player. He is also a penalty killer.
Yep.
And he's got a profile of size and toughness, and we saw that Tuesday in Chicago, that they don't otherwise have with a forward.
Problem is he's going to want term, and I'd be fearful of term.
Well, I'd give him term at the right number. But if it's a choice between the 2 of them, Bluger and Joshua, I'm going to go to Joshua, because here's the thing. I'd have no problem with Pius Suter playing that center spot next year. In fact, he was signed to play that center spot this past offseason. And frankly, there was a fair bit of value on third-line centermen on last summer's market. I mean, just think of how long Suter waited for a deal. That position, that profile of player was not one that gobbled up big contract. Now, that could change with the cap going up, because as we know, these general managers, these owners, you give them cap space, they're going to spend it, and oftentimes foolishly. But if it is a choice, I would take joshua over Bluger. But no, the entirety of the line, I don't think
open market
are going to be able.
Open market, I think Joshua can get $3 million. Does he accept 1.7 over 3 years
of course
by the Canucks?
Not if he can get 3, Blake. That's almost 50%.
But is he going to get term at $3 million a year too?
I don't know.
I don't know either. But you hope that he's tickled enough by what's happened here that he wants to stay there. And you also have to be honest with yourself. You got to believe in yourself, Matt, if you're one of these players. But you also have to be honest with yourself. I'm having a career year with chemistry that is pretty tough to find. Like, it's that good. Am I going to perform and in the next spot? Am I going to have the fun? Am I going to make more dollars? Yes. But is my career going to be what I want it to be in the next stop? Because I might not find what I've got going with these guys.
Yeah, and that's fair, but I think more often than
they
not,
chase
when you're talking about journeyman player like, that.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, gotta look after number 1.
I think you're looking at more money being the priority, being the motivation.
Yeah.
Let's get to today's big story, brought to you by Mr. Lube. Phil Kessel is at Abbotsford Center. He is skating in kind of an audition, but we anticipate that he will be signed and join the Vancouver Canucks. Patrick Allvin, Canucks general manager, releasing a statement Tuesday after Kessel is spotted and photographed at YVR Canucks Twitter. You are still undefeated. Allvin, Phil has made his way to Vancouver and will be working out in Abbotsford this week. Let's hear from Coach Tocchet, known as the Kessel Whisperer in Pittsburgh, on what he knows about the new guy.
Yeah, I think Jim, last couple weeks talking to his agent, and he's going to go down there and skate for 2-3 days, see how he is down there, and reevaluate from there.
Do you have a good relationship with him?
Yeah, over the years, yeah. I know Phil for quite. I haven't talked to him at all, but I've known him for. I know Phil, especially in the Pittsburgh days.
So plan is to skate for 2 or 3 days, and really, so long as Kessel doesn't look horrible, I suspect he'll be signed here from the Vancouver Canucks. Got no problem with this. In fact, he cost you nothing in terms of trade capital going the other way. And so long as it's a fully variable salary in the minors and it doesn't preclude them from adding further depth at the March 8th trade deadline, this is a win for the Canucks because it's pure addition.
Yeah, you do it. You have to make sure, of course, that you've got the cap space to make that last move that you want to make. I mean, I can't imagine they go down to 22 players on the roster and not have like one of Nils Oman or Phil DiGiuseppe up as well. Like, are they going to send one of those guys down now because Phil Kessel's here?
I think much of it will be determined over this next few days. I would think Kessel's at least a week away from.
Yep. It's just
so you may have an injury here. You're going to play several games.
He's a specialist as opposed to the other guys who you can sort of
utility.
You have some more utility. So not having
Giuseppe,
well, he's played every line.
No, fair.
You've got to make sure you've got guys in every spot, and you get a little bit lean on the roster if you send one of those guys down. So it'll be interesting to see what their priorities are, but it's a no-brainer. Cheap. That's our top story, brought to you by Mr. Lube, pioneer of the no appointment oil change, warranty approved oil change, now providing tire service and sales also with no appointments. 16 locations in the Lower Mainland, one near you. Go to mrlube.com.
I did find it a little odd that Talkin said he hadn't talked to him. I would have thought this would have been a conversation that involved the head coach and the head coach having a heart-to-heart with Kessel, because he hasn't played since last spring in the Stanley Cup playoffs. He played in the Winnipeg series for Vegas, who went on to win the Stanley Cup. Very odd that you play 82 games and then just 4 in the Stanley Cup playoffs, but that's the way it was. And frankly, the way the Vegas Golden Knights structured their forward lines last year.
It might be semantics, though.
Well, there was no arguing with what they did.
But it might be semantics about whether or not he spoke to him. Because at the All-Star game, didn't that sound like a guy who had spoken to him? He said he's 100%. I 100% believe he's ready to go.
Okay.
Like, how would you?
So you think he maybe texted with him?
Yeah. Or had a conversation with the agents or whatever.
Playing shape is something that has to be evaluated here.
Yeah.
No doubt. The other offshoot of this, is this going to preclude an Arshdeep Bains or Vasily Podkolzin recall?
Yeah, for the regular season. I mean, I think those are black aces for sure. If they can get into the second round and outlive the Abbey Canucks playoff drive.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, you have to get pretty injured, I think, for those guys to get a look now. And that's too bad, because I think everybody thought Arshdeep Bains was going to get a look.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who knows? I mean, it might be 2 weeks till Phil Kessel's ready to go. And there might be a game or two
at least a week, and you may have injuries.
I mean, they could give him a couple of games as an Abbotsford Canuck as well to get his legs.
I would think so.
So
I would think conditioning and easing into the lineup are a couple of things that are going to happen here.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's guaranteed he's an Abbey Canuck, though. Do you think he actually plays for the Abbey Canucks?
No, I don't think it's guaranteed, but I think it'd be wise.
I think it'd be wise, too.
I mean, he hasn't played since what, last April, May?
Yeah.
That's a long time.
It's a long time.
You know, he's 36 years old.
And I don't think you'd be measuring his point production at that. You're just looking at his fitness at that point in an Abbey Canucks game. You know, I don't think there's any analysis if he goes pointless in 2 games as an Abbey Canuck. I don't think they're like, nah, let's not do this. I think they just want to make sure that he can get up and down.
His last hockey game, April 24th against the Winnipeg Jets, game 4, round 1.
10 months. So it'll be 10 months. Minimum of 10 months off of professional ice.
Still quiet on trade deadline, but getting a little more interesting. Our friend Frank Saravelli, and we'll have Frank on the show on Friday, reports that Jacob Markstrom has agreed to waive his no trade clause, and that there was a deal in place.
Had agreed to, anyway.
Yeah. Yes, with the New Jersey Devils. Then there's the Los Angeles Kings, who lose 7-0 to the Buffalo Sabres on Tuesday. All-star goaltender Cam Talbot
All-star goalie. Yeah.
Since New Year's Eve, 0-7-3, a 3.93 goals against, an 8.78 save percentage, and poor Anze Kopitar becomes the first Selke winner ever to go -6 in a hockey game. So the LA Kings and the New Jersey Devils on goaltending. David Pagnotta of the Fourth Period reporting that our old friend Dave Nonis, who is now an assistant general manager to Craig Conroy in Calgary, if you're not current with Dave, and their head scout Steve Plow were at the game with the Lightning and Bruins. So you wonder whether Tampa and Boston are in on any of the Calgary guys, right? Because that's not goaltending there.
Tanev.
But Tanev, Hanifin.
Yep.
You wonder if there's any there. And then, of course, the UC Saros situation in Nashville, where their star goaltender has one more year remaining on his contract, but they have the great goaltending prospect in Askarov there. New general manager Barry Trotz. Nashville team that's kind of it's in the wild card race, but does it have any upward mobility? Saros at 28 at $5 million for this year and next. Is that another domino that could fall, or are we talking about the Jake Allens of the world to try and shore up porous goaltending in either Los Angeles or New Jersey?
Well, if you thought you were good and even have a chance this year, which LA's got to think they're good enough on the skater side of things. I mean, but Saros is going to cost you a lot because of the term, because you get 2 runs with him. Like LA would have to be ready to pay up. New Jersey, really young team. They might not be as impatient for this year and next. Maybe next year for sure. But do they want to pay the price then for that guy? Because, you got to pay that added price. I think they're going to, they know this has been a banged-up season, so many injuries that I don't know if they've got the expectation of a deep run this year, but I think they would absolutely have it next year. But do you pay the tax of getting Saros the year early? I don't see it. I doubt that would happen. But
so you think Saros is going to cost more than Markstrom? Because Markstrom has term left too, of course.
Yeah, but it's too much term, and I think you're always afraid of the cliff with the age difference, right? Like, when is Markstrom not going to be this Markstrom?
Markstrom with 2 more years after this one, he's an additional $1 million, 6 total. He's 34.
And Markstrom's a funny goalie. When he's good, he's great. When he's bad, he's not very good. Do you have the patience to ride the roller coaster with Jacob Markstrom?
First shot, first shift, first minute.
Yeah.
And look, an interesting scoreboard last night, because we were ready to swear off the Seattle Kraken, Blake, but then they get a victory on the second of a back-to-back, and good on them. They win 2-1 on the island against the Islanders, who are also scrapping in the Eastern Conference playoff race. And then they watch all the teams around them lose without even getting a point. Nashville loses in regulation. St. Louis loses in regulation to a stripped-down Leafs team without Morgan Rielly, John Tavares, Mitch Marner. And the Kings lose as well. So it's really fun scoreboard watching these days, and particularly the 2 wild card races where LA and St. Louis continue to hold down the Western spots at 58 points, and where the Eastern spots are held down by Toronto and Detroit, with New Jersey on the outside looking in. Big loss by the Islanders last night, but I guess they pick up.
I'm holding on hope for the Kraken.
there.
You know me. I really would love to see Canucks Kraken in the first round. I think it would do loads of good for both teams. I think both teams should want that in the first round. And even if the Kraken lose, I still think it's good for them to ignite the local rivalry.
I agree.
And that's the only place you can do it.
Can't go wrong with Calgary. That's a long-standing rivalry. Would love to see it again in the playoffs. Of course, last time the Canucks were in a full-blown Stanley Cup playoffs, with games at Rogers Arena. It was against Calgary in 2015. But I hear you on Seattle. That one needs a match. And the first round this year could be a match because here's the thing. Seattle's playoff tested.
Yeah.
Seattle won a round last year and damn near won a second.
Yeah.
Couldn't help but crack a smile when I saw the Chicken Little last night from the center of the universe after Morgan Rielly's 5-game suspension that head coach Sheldon Keefe would address it after the game. Brad Treliving, the general manager, would address it today, and as many joked, and then Prime Minister Trudeau will address the matter. But Treliving has canceled his press conference, the Pride of Penticton, BC, on the Pride of West Vancouver, BC. They're going to appeal Rielly's suspension. It is a big number, but I got to say, I think George Peros and the Department of Player Safety got this one right. And I want to go to John Rodenberg in Ottawa, who points out why this gets to a 5-game suspension, inciting Peros and the league explanation. Number one, it's an intentional act.
Mm-hmm.
We oftentimes debate these things and go, oh, how can you know his intent? Can you read his brain?
Zadorov.
This one
I don't think
was
Zadorov was
clear
headhunting.
as day,
Yeah.
intentional.
Yeah.
Secondly, there is no mutual jousting here. This isn't a post-whistle scrum. This isn't something within the course of play.
No.
Third, it's retribution. It's hard to argue it isn't retribution. And then also, they cite that Morgan Rielly had an opportunity to engage him in a, quote, different manner. And we've talked about this with the likes of John Shannon and Murph Gaffar and others this week. You had an ability to skate by and say, hey, kid, we got something coming for you next time we play, whatever the case may be, or even just a shove.
Yeah.
You know, you just shove them, you probably avoid a suspension.
Yeah, I think so. Probably get fined.
And then, of course, he uses the stick as a weapon. So really, this is a touch 'em all Joe.
Well, but the biggest one, and it sort of precipitates all the other ones that he did, it's after the final whistle. You know, if that's the 4-3 goal with 8 minutes left in the third period, it's not 5 games. It's not 5 games. Game's still kind of underway, even if it's after the whistle.
Yeah.
It's after the game. The game is over. The minute you start to intentionally cross-check a guy in the face at the conclusion of a game when he is most unsuspecting, you're going to get slammed. Like, it's open shut case. It really is.
We really have an inverse Allen Iverson here. Not a practice.
No.
A game.
Yeah. A game. Well, at that point, it's not
a game.
At that point, it's not even a game. Not even practice.
So we'll see if that appeal falls on kind ears and whether it's reduced. But as of right now, the Leafs looking at playing without their best defenseman for 4 more.
Have you seen their record, though, without Morgan Rielly?
Yeah.
And this is not to slag Morgan Rielly. He's a great defenseman.
Mm-hmm.
They've lost, I think,
look who they
2
won
games out of 18 without Morgan Rielly.
Look who they won with last night.
Yeah.
Some guy I never heard of scored a hat trick.
Yeah.
What's his name again?
Bobby McMahon. Which is the most AHL. It's an ECHL name.
I mean,
that's like a captain of an ECHL team. That's what he's turned into, a legend in Utica.
Oh, is there Oh no, you're just using
I'm just using it.
Okay. I was gonna say, have the Marlies moved to Utica? Anyways, yeah, big suspension there. You don't see a lot of 5 gamers in the National Hockey League, but there you are. All right, let's get to today's menu. It is brought to you by Greta, and we invite you to join us February 22nd alongside our friends at Canucks Army for a watch party at Greta. It's a ticketed event, $10. You can get the tickets at nationgear.ca. The doors open at 6 p.m. there at 70 West Cordova, and it's in support of Canucks Place Children's Hospice. We will give away some prizes. There will be some food and drink specials. Guaranteed good time. Nationgear.ca, $10 tickets, February 22nd, doors at 6 p.m. On the podcast side, we're going to have a welcome mat here on where Phil Kessel should play with. And really, you should listen to the podcast if you're only watching on YouTube. Frank Corrado, and playing to touch on with Frank, I mean, he was teammates with Phil Kessel. He was teammates with Teddy Bluger. He is certainly tracking the exploits of this third line. We wonder whether this is the best third line in the league right now. We'll get to some hashtags, the best and worst of Twitter, plus the Lions getting busy in CFL free agency.
All right, time for our best bets, a presentation of Sports Interaction, your homegrown sports book and casino. What do you got, Matthew?
Tiger Woods is playing as a host of the Genesis Invitational Tournament at Los Angeles' Riviera.
Warned Jordan Spieth that he was going to hit into him this morning.
Well, and Tiger is hoping to play once a month. So that's here at the Genesis. That's next month at the Players. That's April at the Masters, May in the PGA, and on and on. If you like him to win, he's 126 to 1.
Yeah, I don't like him to win.
No. I'm going to take last year's runner-up, Max Homa. There's no John Rahm at this tournament. He won last year, right? So Homa at 21 to 1.
Homa at Homa. I don't.
It's true. He's an LA boy.
That's right. I don't think the Canucks are going to be high flying. I'm not saying they can't win versus the Red Wings, but first game back after the road trip, I think they're going to play a more conservative style. I bet you Rick Tocchet implores them to play with structure. Last change gives the coach a little extra something. So I'm going to take a rare under with the Canucks these days. It's 6.5, so it's pretty safe under, and it pays out at 210.
You thinking Demko or DeSmith?
I think it's Demko.
Yeah,
it's Demko. But I mean, under 6.5 is 210. That seems pretty nice. Mm-hmm. So that's where I'm going.
Detroit is high scoring though. They have all those double digits,
but that still allows you a 4-2 game. I mean, that's not bad.
Fair.
Sports Interaction, your homegrown sportsbook and casino. Custom props, speaking directly to a Vancouver sports fan, plus a best-in-class casino with thousands of games and live dealers. Sports Interaction, bet local, must be 19 years of age, and please play responsibly.
Frank Corrado coming up.
If you don't have tickets for a big game at the rink, go to Greta Bar, 50 West Cordova Street, and you can soak up the atmosphere, whether you have tickets and are walking to and from the rink or not. It's a great place to catch the game. And for road games, of course, like February the 22nd, cheer them on at Greta Bar. Spend $10 on a ticket at nationgear.ca. Proceeds from the night with Canuck Army and Sekeres Price. Go to Canuck Place Children's Hospice. We'd love to see you there. February 22nd, Greta Bar, 50 West Cordova.
Great Clips is the official hair salon of the National Hockey League. There are 37 salons in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, all Canadian-owned and operated. Download the app and find the nearest to you. When you're up next for a cut, you'll get a ready next text. Great Clips. It's going to be great. Joined now by TSN hockey analyst, former Vancouver Canuck and Pittsburgh Penguin, Mr. Frank Corrado. How we doing?
Good. All good in here. If you hear any sirens or horns blasting or anything like that, I'm in New York and my hotel room is low to the ground here. So yeah, I'm getting a full dose of the Big Apple right
Good
now.
Mood lighting too. You look like you're in like a nice urban lounge. It's good. Yeah,
that's right. Well, you know what? Like the stanchion comes on here and he's got like his crazy backdrop like made for podcasts. So we'll set the mood a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you getting time for a show, a deli? What's the social plan in New York?
I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. I don't know. It's like being a player. Sometimes after a game, you just can't sleep. And then I was up at 5:30. But I have two things planned here. I want to grab a slice for sure. And then I don't know. I always grab a bagel in New York. Like nothing crazy. I'm going to get some steps in today. That's my plan after this.
There you go. Great walking city. And nobody does the red checkered board Italian better than New York City.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm sure you'll find a place. Everyone I talk to talks about how Phil Kessel is beloved by his teammates. And I know his teammates also take great amusement with him. You played with Kessel in Pittsburgh. What is it about the guy that seems to light up all of his ex-teammates?
I think he's just a very genuine guy. Like there's nothing fake about him. Like he'll be very honest with you. And for better or for worse, but like he just goes by everything he does very honestly. And like I can give you a couple good examples. Like So I had been called up to Pittsburgh, and Phil and I had kind of struck up a little conversation talking about the guys in Toronto. Like, he knew them so well. He had spent so much time there. And we were down in Detroit, and the hotel you stay at in Detroit, there's a good steakhouse in there. And, you know, sometimes you don't want to venture too far off and whatever. So I just went down to the bar. He was already eating dinner down there. So I just, you know, I was going to eat dinner at the bar. He goes, yeah, come sit with me. And he wanted to know how all his boys in Toronto were doing. How's JVR? How's this guy? How's that guy? You know, we were kind of like two guys who like hockey, who didn't really know each other very well, but had one thing in common, the Toronto connection, and just talking about that team and what that team entails, and almost being like two fans kind of sitting around at a bar watching the game, kind of talking hockey. So I thought that was really cool. And like, even, you know, on the ice, like he has a high standard for his game, the game of people around him. And it kind of, you can see it, like some of the clips that he's had over the years with Pittsburgh, where he's coming back to the bench and he's pissed off and he's looking at Tocchet and they're going back and forth. And like, he goes by everything very honestly and very genuine. And I think that's the reason why guys really are drawn to his personality.
It doesn't seem like there's an ego at all. Is there any, I mean, there's a confidence. Like, we've seen some intense sort of conversations on the bench with Tocchet and other coaches too, of just about gameplay and that sort of thing. So there's confidence, but it doesn't seem like there's an ego there that he struts around like I'm Phil Kessel.
No, God, no. The furthest thing from that, like, yeah. He'll just walk into the gym with like his flip-flops on and a coffee and look at the guys and that's cool. Like, you know, like just something like that. Right. But like, speaking of the gym, like he's, you know, I never trained with him in the off season. I obviously got to see the in-season stuff, but there's like legendary stories about him training in Toronto in the off season with, like, you know, all the pro guys, whether it's Gary Roberts or all these guys that would train together. And he would, you know, he'd go on a little fishing trip and then come back, and he would still be stronger and more explosive than all the guys that had been there, like grinding away. Like it was like, guys would say like, no, this guy's a genetic freak, like what he's able to do, and just, you know, hop into the gym, throw some weights on a sled or, you know, throw some weight on the bar and watch what this guy can do. Like it was very impressive. Those are kind of like the little, you know, summertime urban legends of Phil Kessel in the gym in Toronto.
Well, you may have just answered this with the genetic freak thing, but I was going to ask, like, he's kind of a throwback. He's a different shape than your modern hockey player. He's got the different hairline, the different look, the different attitude. How does he get it done? Like, what is his genius on the ice? What has sustained him being a top line and scoring NHL player for so long?
Well, I mean, he does play a brand of hockey that would lend itself to longevity. You know, like he's not the first one running in there crashing and banging. You know, he's not really putting himself in the line of fire very often. But I will say this, with all that being said, he's played a long time in the NHL. He's 36 years old now. You would think at some point you would pop a groin, or your back would hurt, or you'd tear something, or just sometimes maybe you just get caught with some shrapnel and you miss a game or two. Like you take a look at his hockey DB, all I see is 82s. I see a 70, a 56, and a 42. It's like, it's crazy that he was able to play that long and get through it so unscathed. So, like, he's obviously a very intelligent hockey player to be able to do that. But it kind of goes back to that, what I was saying, like there's not too many guys that are built the way he's built. And it sounds weird to say because he's not like cut like a Greek god. We know what Phil's all about, but it has a little bit to do with that. It also has a little bit to do with the style of game he plays. It obviously lends itself to sticking around and being available more often than not.
Didn't we all have that guy in high school who didn't work out at all, that was just freakishly strong and no one really knew why? And you wonder if like just inherent good core strength has kept him as durable as you're talking about.
And we should say 70 and 56, those were the pandemic shortened seasons, right? Like exactly. This was an Iron Man at one point.
Yeah. He was a good skater too. even at 36, even if a good skater loses a step, he's probably still at worst an average skater, right?
I would think so. Like,
Yeah.
and that goes back to the explosiveness that he has. But yeah, like Phil in his prime down the wing, like a really fast skater, tough to handle one-on-one that way. And like, I would imagine like he probably is a guy who can pick it up very quickly. Like I don't think it would be a long adjustment period for him. Like he played 82 regular season games last year. Guy still had 14 goals. So like, I don't think you just lose it that quick. And Vegas was a very deep team. And the thing you need to remember about Vegas last year, especially, they had all their players lower in the lineup so perfectly slotted that they provided something that other teams couldn't counteract. Like they had like your guy like William Carrier lower in the lineup, Nicholas Watt. It's like, those guys are really hard to play against. Like those guys provide something that Phil couldn't do. So he probably needed to play higher in the lineup, but those spots were taken come playoff time. So like, as much as, you could talk about, he wasn't really in the mix in Vegas in the playoffs, he played 4 games, but I think it also has something to do with the fact that Vegas was really well built. And they had other competitive advantages lower in the lineup that they needed to utilize in order to win, and they did that.
You've called Tocchet the Kessel Whisperer with us before. Rick's a hard on the puck, chip and chase, forecheck with ferocity type of guy, and as we've just described, that is not Phil Kessel's game. How did these two become so close? What is it about Kessel that Tocchet takes a shine to?
I'm not sure how it kind of originated. Like I know just from being around there a little bit, there were some bigger personalities on that team, and what I mean by that is like people who are very competitive within the game of hockey, who want to win and want to drive others to win. And I think when you have players like that, it's a good thing for sure. But you do need to have some kind of buffer. And I think Tocchet was that buffer, whether it was between him and Phil or Phil and Malkin. And, it was just, you needed that person that could kind of calm the waters. And I think Tocchet was that guy. And Matt, to your point about, the style of player that Tocchet really likes, we see that in Vancouver, and we've kind of seen that identity within this team. I'll also, say that he also knows how to use players to their strengths and not try and make them something they're not. And there's a difference for me with, you could use the example of Kuzmenko, right? Like he probably saw something in Kuzmenko that he said, like, this kid hasn't really unlocked this yet. Like, I think there's something more there and I want to drag it out of him. And that's different than Phil is what he is. And we've known it for a long time. And in Pittsburgh, they used him in a spot where, although his game wasn't, crashing and banging and physical, you just used him in a way where you didn't have to ask that from him and you got the most of him. And I think that's something important to keep in mind if he does end up playing for Vancouver. It's that Tocchet knows what he is and he's going to try and put him in a position to succeed.
All right. What's your forecast for him here? Where do you think he should play? How much should he play? And, he's 8 points away from 1,000, which would make him the 99th player in league history.
This is just enough games left where you'd think that's pretty reasonable to expect, even if he doesn't get in for another week and a half.
It's okay. Like Vancouver, for me, has a lot of players really well slotted. So, I mean, ideally, you would think he's going to play higher in the lineup because that's where you're going to get the most out of him. Let's just say the third line is untouchable right now. Like that third line is as good as any line in the NHL. So that's not going anywhere. You would think, okay, well, a fourth line, is that how you work him into the lineup? But he's not a fourth line player. And, with the way the fourth line kind of looks right now, DiGiuseppe's back. You have Mikheyev playing lower in the lineup. Like Sam Lafferty has been really good. So I'm not exactly like convinced that he needs to play lower. And, so you take a look at the second line, JT Miller, Besser, like Pusuter. I mean, how does he get in on that line? Because that line has to eat some matchups. And, So it is interesting to see where he plays. Like I would imagine he's got to start lower, lower in the lineup. I'm convinced that he has to start lower in the lineup, and it's not going to be the third line, so that leaves it as the fourth line. But that does something to your identity of your team. So I could be really wrong on this. Maybe he does, like, if he does end up playing, he goes higher in the lineup. But I think they've got a few checkpoints to go before they kind of come to that decision. Like, I think he's got to go to Abbotsford. He's got to show that he's in shape, or he's got to get in shape. He's got to play well down there. And then you'll kind of go from there. And maybe you'll have injuries by that point. Like, I think that's also something to keep in mind with Kessel. It's like, you're almost hedging and saying, okay, it's not going to cost us an asset to bring him in. It's just going to cost us a contract spot. And, if something happens in 2 weeks where someone goes down, we got a guy that we're comfortable with, and we know we can put him in, and we know exactly what he is. It didn't cost you anything other than a contract and some prorated money. So I kind of see it as a little more insurance rather than, okay, we got to get him in right away and see how he's going to help us, immediately.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Bluger, Joshua, Garland. Best third line in the league? Best
line ever, period.
The best line ever assembled in the game of hockey. Yeah. Okay, the best third line in the league, this debate was going on earlier in the season between the Dallas third line, which had Marchment, Duchesne, and Sagan, and a little bit with the Winnipeg third line with Appleton, Niederreiter, and Lowry. And then now the Dallas third line is like being listed on paper as the second line, which it never was the third line anyways. But as of right now, I can't think of a third line that's better than those guys. And quite honestly, they're playing and they're having more of an immediate impact than a lot of like second and first lines on other teams. So credit to them. But the other thing that really kind of stands out for them right now is throughout the course of a game, there's not a lot of shifts where they're on the ice and nothing is happening. It's like they get on the ice and quickly something's happening. Like there's something to the net, or there's a rush chance, or they got in on the forecheck and they caused a turnover and they're playing in the offensive zone. I don't know. It's quite a compliment to them that they can get on the ice and they can make something happen pretty quickly. And there's some lines that go through a game and you're like, oh, like where were they? Were they on the? I haven't seen. Maybe it was a little bit of like a neutral zone kind of choppy shift. Not them. Like they win their shift a lot. And I know even like last night was an easier opponent in Chicago, but you still have to do it. And they did a great job of that. And I think that's the thing that stands out is just how soon after they get over the boards, they're making something happen. They're getting right to work.
Well, the other thing is the third line generally, and these guys too, often will get you the dig the puck out of the corner, center to the open guy, shoots and scores. That's generally the simplicity of a third line role. The chemistry of these guys, and we've talked about chemistry before, it's unfathomable to me what level of chemistry they have right now, in that they're scoring Sedin-like goals. Like the give and go goal, like how does each of them know that they're going to be ready for those sorts of passes? Neither one of those passes were the easiest passes to make. They make them. The little stick lift for Garland, knowing that his man's in the slot behind him on the Joshua goal. Like this, again, we expect the Sedins to process at that level, but a huge compliment to all three of these guys. They're processing like at a superstar level there. It's unbelievable.
It really is. And it has something to do with the fact that, like, I think all of those three guys think the game the same way, and they have a little bit of greasiness to them.
They do.
And they have, like, what I mean by that is like, and you kind of alluded to it there. It's like a little stick lift, and there's a certain level of gamesmanship that all three of those guys have. And I think like Garland has always had that, and Tocchet really wanted to see that out of Dakota Joshua this year. Like, remember early in the year, we're talking about Rick Tocchet being really hard on that player. And is it necessary? And turns out it was necessary, because there was another level for him to get to, and he's obviously gotten to it now. But all three of those guys, they kind of like they have the same game plan. They have the same mentality to the way they want to play. It's fast, it's direct, it's in your face. Like that Dakota Joshua, I would not want to play against that guy. Like he's a menace. Like he finishes every hit. He wins a lot of battles. He asserts himself in front of the net. Like, and with the way you have to play defense now, you can't cross-check and box out the way you used to. So he's taken full advantage of that. Like, I don't know. All those guys kind of have the same thought process in the way they want to play the game. And it works really well. And they all kind of complement each other. There's no kind of, hey, we got to drag this guy along because, he's just not quite with us. It's like they almost all push each other to do a little bit better.
You played with Bluger in Pittsburgh. Did you see him turning into this kind of a player and being the center on what is potentially the best third line in the NHL?
Well, so I got to play with him his rookie year in the minors, and I was always impressed with his work ethic. Like he was a kid who, like when he signed his deal, you could tell he was never gonna take the easy way out or take any kind of shortcut. Like I remember. And I, myself and some veteran guys, we would put in a good effort. We would shoot some pucks after practice, and we would be, done our cool down, done our shower, leaving the rink. And this guy would just be getting off the ice, and his stick blade was, barely had any tape left on it and covered in snow. And he had picked up all the pucks by himself. Like he really made a point early in his career to be the hardest working player he possibly could be. So I give him a lot of credit in that regard. He doesn't come about it accidentally. And I think, when you see someone who's established that early in their career, and then they get to the NHL, they have a good understanding of what it takes to get there, and more importantly, what it takes to stay there. And he's not afraid to work. And I think that's really important. He's not afraid to say, it's been a hard week. We had back-to-back games. We had a hard practice. We had a hard skate. It's pretty easy for someone to say, just going to go home, take it easy today. And, but he's the kind of guy where it's like, no, I'm actually going to put in another round of work because I know this is going to benefit me. So, I always kind of saw Teddy being like a player lower in the lineup that was going to be a workhorse kind of guy who could make some plays, score some goals. Like he scored some big overtime goals for us when he was a rookie. And that kind of sticks out in my memory, but he always went about it with this work ethic that he wanted to be unmatched by his peers.
So the question is, at the end of this season, with Dakota Joshua and Ted Bluger needing contracts, and yet the Canucks, of course, needing to give a raise to Filip Hronek and Elias Pettersson and OEL money and all that, they're going to run out of dough pretty quick. Do they owe it to themselves to ensure that Joshua and Bluger go nowhere, even though it's going to snooker them, paint them into a corner that has already been painted into at this point?
I know. This is the thing that the Canucks have kind of gotten themselves into now that other good teams have had to deal with. It's like you get these players on some value deals. They do really well for you, and you're a good team. Now they're more exposed. Now the cat's out of the bag. Everyone wants these guys. You got to pay a premium or else someone else is going to do it. And I think from what we've seen around the league with these kind of situations, you're better off trying to acquire that version of that player again. Yep. You know what I mean? If you overpay and you give those guys too much term, you're paying for what you got the previous year. You need to try and find that version in this year's crop, whether it's a trade or probably a UFA, which is difficult. It's difficult. And we've seen a lot of teams just say, you know what? We don't want to leave it to chance. We know what this guy is. And guess what? You sign him for a lot. You give him a lot of years, you give him a lot of money. You're like, oh man, would love to get out from that contract. And time will tell. You don't know if that's the case, but we do have a larger sample size now in the NHL with the flat cap the way it's been, where teams that have kind of, for the most part, teams that have kind of walked away and said, hey, we're just going to try and find the next version of you, have been better suited. The one example that does come to mind is the Leafs not re-signing Zach Hyman. Like, I think that one hurts every time Hyman scores a goal in Edmonton or has a big night. But in Toronto's defense, they got Michael Bunting and had him for 2 years at $950. And statistically, he outperformed what Hyman had done in Toronto the 2 previous years. So I'm not saying, like, Zach Hyman, that deal should have been done in Toronto, but like they went out and tried to find that version of him, and they had success. So
it's sad for the fans, right? Because the fans have established this emotional bond with these guys, but business is business, and I fully agree. And you think about like a Jay Beagle, who the Benning regime brought in here. Jay Beagle sort of established himself as a good character role player, got some shine on him, but they gave him 4 years at decent money, and they rued every day of it.
Well, I mean, how many times did you guys see that example with the last regime, where it was like we're going to pay these guys that are, you know, a little over the hill, but great guys. We're going to give them big money and give them term. It's like, why? You could just find that guy again. It's tough decisions, especially when you got to explain them. But there's plenty of examples where teams have kind of, you know, found someone a little more on the cheap who can provide the same kind of service.
Yeah.
Lastly, Frankie, I'm not sure if you caught Jake Wallman and the gritty celebration. I'm not sure if you caught Nikita Zadorov with a bad hit to the head of Lucas Raymond. Are we beyond the point of retribution, ugly incidents in the National Hockey League, particularly when one team is fighting for a playoff spot like Detroit is, or would you anticipate there's some spiciness in Thursday's game?
I would think there's going to be some spiciness. I did see like the big celebration, the big grand celebration. It is a little bit much, but I also saw a video that he had pointed to some kids in the stands that were like doing the gritty or something, and he, you know, so there's that angle to it. I don't know. I mean,
it was Kids' Day there at Little Caesars Arena, so there were a lot of kids, and
you know, maybe that might be a little talking to. That might just be a little skate by. We didn't appreciate that. Like, you know, don't do that kind of stuff. I don't know. I don't think that one turns into the Morgan Rielly cross-check.
Okay, I was just gonna say, just so long as this game is the silver medalist this week on the code, because no one can compete.
Bronze
with Greg,
where were you?
And with our boy Morgan Rielly. You buck him up, okay? Because that's a big time suspension.
Listen, I've heard stories. Okay, where were you when Canada, Soviet Union, the '72 Summit Series? Where were you when the O.J. Simpson trial went down? Where were you, Matt and Blake, when Morgan Rielly cross-checked Ridley Gregg?
Yeah,
you will never forget where you were.
Yeah, it was quite a moment. More on the hockey panels tonight, I'm sure. The story's not dead.
Yeah, I heard actually we're doing a 30 for 30 on it. So,
are we really? Okay, swing that documentary team into action.
I've heard there's some conspiracy. There might have been a second cross-checker.
And the Senators mocked it in their intermission last night.
Have a barber doing
they? Brilliant as always, Frank. Magnificent insights here into particularly some of your former teammates there and what's making them tick. Appreciate this. Until next week.
All right, boys. Talk soon.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.